Broadcasting from beautiful downtown Tallahassee, it's Nantan Lupan at the Drive-In.
Well, this is my first milestone, 25 episodes, so I'm jumping line to bring you something special. And that special is named Bogart. So welcome to episode 25, Sahara, 1943. This is one of those wartime propaganda films that turned out to be pretty solid. They were usually shot very quickly and with a hastily written script. I have to always remind myself that we hadn't won the war yet, and these actors could have been executed if things had gone the other way. Nazi Germany may have seemed a long way from Hollywood, but Pearl Harbor was relatively close as the bomber flies. Released in November 1943, this movie predates D-Day by over half a year. Sahara 1943 is based in part on a Soviet film, The 13, 1937. A decade later, the studio that made Sahara 1943 made Last of the Comanches, a.k.a. The Saber and the Arrow 1953, which starred Broderick Crawford. This movie was made again in Australia with James Belushi as Gunn, and the same title, Sahara 1995. This movie should never be confused or even associated with the terrible Sahara 2005 with Matthew McConaughey. Sahara 1943 was made in the California desert. U.S. soldiers and equipment were used for both sides during the filming. The German plane that attacked the tank was a P-51 painted to look German. The half-track was an American M2. The realistic sweat was created by makeup artist Harry Pringle using a coat of Vaseline and spraying water over it. According to the New York Times, over 2,000 tons of sand was transported to the location, spray-painted, and blown with a wind machine to give the desired effect. I don't like to spend a lot of time talking about directors, but I will when credit is deserved. Zoltan Korda was born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He began his film work in Hungary and also served in the cavalry there. He moved to London where he worked with his brother in the film industry. In 1940, he and his brother moved to Hollywood and continued their film career. Korda's military experience drew him to making military action movies. One of these he made while he was in London is The Four Feathers, 1939, and it is widely considered to be his finest work. In America in 1943, he was chosen to direct and write the screenplay of today's movie, Sahara 1943. Today's film stars one of the all-time greats and perhaps one of the most influential actors of the last 75 years, Humphrey Bogart. Bogart was cast in the role of Sergeant Joe Gunn, the commander of an isolated American tank in Africa during the English battle with Rommel for control of North Africa. Bogart was born in New York City, but not in Hell's Kitchen or the rough parts like some of the actors we have already talked about. His parents were doing pretty well. Bogey was preparing for medical school at Yale when he was kicked out of Phillips Academy in Massachusetts. Bogart joined the Navy, but it is believed the war ended before he saw action. It is during this time that he received the scar on his lip that created his distinctive speaking style. The most commonly accepted story is that he was escorting a prisoner to the brig when the prisoner asked for a smoke. When Bogey looked for a match, the prisoner hit him in the face with handcuffs and escaped. After his time in the Navy, Bogart returned to New York and began acting. In 1930, he signed a contract with Fox. He did some shorts but was released after 2 years. He continued stage work and minor roles until Warner Brothers began preparing to film The Petrified Forest 1936. Leslie Howard, who was later in Gone with the Wind 1939, insisted that his old stage partner, Bogart, be cast in the film. Following the success of this film, Bogart was given a long-term contract with Warner Brothers. These contracts forced actors to take the roles they were offered. From 1936 to 40, Bogart was in 28 films. George Raft turned down the role of High Sierra 1941, and Bogart was heading to the top. Bogart also made The Maltese Falcon 1941, playing the part of Sam Spade. This was followed by Casablanca 1942, where Bogey brought the cynical Rick to life in the fight against the Nazi terror. This was followed by such films as To Have and Have Not 1944, where he met his future wife Lauren Bacall, The Big Sleep 1946, and Key Largo 1948. His movies continued to improve with The Treasure of the Sierra Madres 1948, The African Queen 1951, for which he won an Oscar, and The Caine Mutiny 1954. His final film before his death was the boxing classic The Harder They Fall 1956. Bruce Bennett played Waco Holt, a member of the American tank crew. Before changing his name, Bennett won a silver medal as a shot putter in the 1928 Olympics. Some of his earlier work was in the Tarzan serials, and it led to him being typecast in these roles. After completing one of these roles in 1938, Bennett dropped out to study acting. He returned with his new name and became a leading man in many Warner Brothers movies. One of my favorite roles of his is as Cody, the guy that tried to join the gold miners in The Treasure of the Sierra Madres, 1948. Bennett retired from the movie business in 1960. J. Carroll Naish was cast in the role of the Italian soldier Giuseppe. Naish was a New Yorker that had a large amount of stage experience. He was often cast in the role of a Middle Easterner or Latin, such as in this role. He had a long movie career that spanned from 1930 to 1971. The great Lloyd Bridges was cast as English soldier Fred Clarkson. This was an odd choice for the native Californian. While at UCLA, he caught the acting bug and met his wife of more than 50 years. After a little stage work, he made his film debut in 1936 and was under a Columbia contract by 1941. It was rumored in the 1950s that he was a communist, but he was cleared, and during his career he had well over 200 movie and television appearances. He is best known by many for his time on the television show Sea Hunt 1958-61. Bridges continued to work as he grew older, showing his range in comedies such as Airplane 1980, Joe vs. the Volcano 1990, Hot Shots 1991. He died of natural causes at the age of 85 in 1998. He is the father to actor Bo and Jeff Bridges.
The dude abides.
Rex Ingram was in the role of Sergeant Major Tambul, a member of the Sudanese Defense Force. Born in Corsica, Ingram graduated from Northwestern University with a medical degree. Then he started an acting career that spanned 50 years. His first film was the silent Tarzan of the Apes, 1918. He received praise for his role in The Green Pastures, 1936. He is widely known for this movie and playing Jim in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, 1939, opposite Mickey Rooney. He died in 1969 and is buried in California. Dan Duryea was the other American tank crewman, Jimmy Doyle. Duryea was born in upstate New York. He caught the acting bug early and was in the high school drama club. While at Cornell University, he decided to go into advertising. This work contributed to Duryea having a heart attack in his 20s. Fortunately for all, he returned to acting. Duryea went from summer stock to Broadway and then to Hollywood. He made his film debut in The Little Foxes 1941 with Bette Davis as his co-star. He took a path less traveled by specializing in being the person you love to hate. IMDb states, quote, his sniveling, deliberate, taunting demeanor and snarling, flat, nasal tones set this actor apart from other similar slimeballs of the 1940s and 50s, unquote. Duryea's motto was stated to be, once a scoundrel, always a scoundrel. Good bad roles continued until the post-war years when Duryea began to get B parts in B movies. However, many of his roles were memorable as the bad guy that got what was coming in the end. He was a fine actor. In his personal life, he was the opposite of the character he played. He was devoted to his wife and family and was once a scoutmaster. Duryea died early and is buried in California. Louise Mercer was cast in the role of the Free French soldier Jean Leroux, or Frenchie. Mercer had 159 TV and movie credits, but not much stands out. He did a great job in this movie, however. IMDb says that Peter Lawford was uncredited as one of the British soldiers. I looked but could not ID him. Lawford was part of the Rat Pack with Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and Joey Bishop. Story. The movie begins with the prologue. In June 1942, a small detachment of American tanks with American crews joined the British 8th Army in North Africa to get experience in desert warfare under actual battle conditions. History has proved that they learned their lesson well. In the opening scenes, U.S. Army Sergeant Joe Gunn, Humphrey Bogart, is scrounging parts off other destroyed American tanks as German shells rain down around them. Their tank receives a radio message that the Germans are in every direction but south, and all units should move in that direction.
No code, no code. General retreat has been ordered in all sectors. Measuring surviving units note that all points east, west, and north are under enemy surveillance and control. Over to you. Over.
I don't understand. To the south?
All points east, west, and north under enemy control.
Gunn gets the M3 lead tank running and heads south.
You don't feed them enough. It's like a dame. You don't feed them, they won't do nothing.
In Britain, the tank was called by two names based on how the guns were configured in the turret. The U.S. pattern was called the Lee after Confederate General Robert E. Lee. The British pattern was known as the Grant after Union General Ulysses S. Grant. These quickly produced M3s were replaced with M4 Sherman tanks as soon as they became available during the war. Gunn's M3 is named Lulu Bell after his cavalry horse. As units changed from cavalry to mechanized, the former troopers were placed in relatively new tank units, aviation units, or POW/quartermaster units, as von Scherbach, Otto Preminger complained in Stalag 17, 1953. Anyway, this movie is based loosely on the Battle of Gazella, where German forces under Rommel broke through and took Tobruk, Libya. This is also a big plot point in The Big Red One, 1980, a movie that we will cover in the future. The Allied forces were pushed back into Egypt, and the Suez Canal was threatened with a German takeover. Moving south for the tank crew was the worst possible thing to do, as the sand becomes softer and water becomes less plentiful as you go. Back to the movie. Gunn, Waco Holt, Bruce Bennett, and Jimmy Doyle, Dan Duryea, head south trying to conserve fuel and water as they travel. Shortly they arrive at a field hospital that the Germans have bombed. They find a group of stragglers consisting of a British doctor, Captain Halliday, Richard Nugent, 4 Commonwealth soldiers, and Free French Corporal LaRue, Frenchie, played by Louis Mercer.
What are you looking at? Oh, help yourself.
Merci bien. American cigarette holds you for a long time.
Pass them around.
Halliday, the only officer, cedes command to Gunn. This is not impossible, as most medical and legal officers are not line commanders, but I have never seen an officer yet whose ego would allow him to do this. I hope to look into leadership a little later with The Command 1954, where a medical officer takes command of a wagon train moving through Indian country, and in Zulu 1964, where an engineering officer takes over for a line officer because he has an earlier date of rank. Anyway, the motley crew loads onto the tank and heads south. It is not long before the group runs into Sudanese Sergeant Major Tambul, Rex Ingram, and his Italian prisoner, Giuseppe, J. Carroll Naish.
It is true, Bimbashi. I thought I had captured an enemy tank.
Tambul says he knows the desert and will lead the group to a well, Hassan Barani. Gunn says he will only take the Allies along and insists that Giuseppe be left behind. Giuseppe shows pictures of his family and begs, but Gunn drives away.
She told me she get the letter from the cousin of the uncle. He working now in Pittsburgh, USA, in the steel factory. Maybe he make a steel for this tank in Pittsburgh, USA.
After several hundred yards, the tank stops, and Giuseppe is allowed to join the group. As the group travels further into the desert, they are attacked by a German fighter plane flown by Luftwaffe pilot Captain von Schlieto, Kurt Kruger. During the attack, Clarkson, Lloyd Bridges, is wounded, but the Allies manage to bring the plane down. They capture the pilot, who appears not to speak English. When the group arrives at Hassan Barani, they find that the well is dry. Before they leave, Clarkson dies from his wounds, and they bury him near the well. Tambul leads the group to another well at Bir Akrama, but it's little more than a trickle. The group wants to gather all the water they can before they head further into the desert. In a cutaway, we find out that the German mechanized column must travel off their route to obtain water. It is not long before the German advance party arrives in an armored half-track, half wheels and half tracks. Gunn sets up an ambush and kills all but 2 of the scouts. Gunn separates the hardened German Nazi sergeant from the private and uses water to extract information from him.
Yeah. Tell him to get him water, only if he talks.
Finding out that their unit is desperate for water. Gunn releases the 2 Germans to walk back to their column with the false promise that they will trade water for food. As soon as the pair is around the corner, the German sergeant kills the private for talking. By this point, the well has run dry. Although his original plan was to bug out before the Germans arrive, Gunn decides they might do some good if they held the German column up for a while. He gives the group a pep talk, and they all agree to stay and fight. Gunn also sends Waco off in the half-track to look for help. When the German column arrives, Gunn changes the deal to water for guns.
Water for guns. For every rifle you turn over to me, I'll give you a pint of water. For the mortar, I'll give you a quart.
German Major von Falken, John Wingraft, orders a frontal assault on the Allies, which fails with heavy German losses. But the Allies are losing men also. The Germans continued to attack and both sides continued to lose men. By now the Italian prisoner Giuseppe is on the American side. The German von Sletow is keeping him under control. During an attack, von Sletow stabs Giuseppe and escapes. The mortally wounded Giuseppe lets Gunn know about the escape. Since it is critical that the Germans not report that the well was out of water, Tamboul decides to run down the fleeing German and smothers him in the sand. Actor Kurt Kruger said that when actor Rex Ingram pressed his face into the sand, Kruger almost passed out. He said if the director had not cut, he might have died from lack of air. Tamboul is killed before he can make it back to the Allied lines, but gives the thumbs up for mission accomplished before he dies. The Germans ask for a second parley, and Frenchie goes to talk to them. While they are talking, the Allies pretend to take baths as they pour what little water they have from one bucket to another.
French Corporal Leroux, parlementaire. Major von Falken. I was the only one he could send. The others are bathing.
Boy, I'd give plenty to see the expression on that Heine's puss right now.
Frenchie hates the Nazis because he has the most experience with them. As Frenchie returns to his lines, von Falken has his men shoot him in the back. Gunn and the group fire back, killing von Falken. The Germans try a final all-out assault, but they are so thirsty they begin dropping their weapons and shouting Wasser, Wasser, translated water, water. It is at this point you feel great fear for Gunn and Bates, Patrick O'Moore, the only survivors, wondering what will be their fate when the Nazis find out there is no water at the well. Gunn is screaming and laughing. Come on, take all you want.
Water. You're giving guns for water. Go ahead. There it is. Take all you can find. Go on, take it. There it is. Roll in it. Swim in it.
The Germans go to the well and it's gushing with water as a result of a German shell strike. Gunn and Bates start collecting the German weapons as they drink. They begin marching the German prisoners east and meet Waco coming in with a relief column.
The line is held the Jerry's at El Alamein.
Turning back Rommel and his Africorps. World-famous short summary. American GI teaches Nazis the art of bluffing. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Remember, you can find all of the links at snarkymoviereviews.com, and I appreciate those reviews in iTunes.